Hey everyone, we're back from the holiday, clean-shaven and ready to continue the Haunted Mansion ghost tour. And today is kind of weird because it doesn't feature a ton of ghosts, but stick with me. Because today we're starting with a couple of rooms in the mansion that you pass after you board the ride. Starting here in the library, where, as the ghost host so cleverly notes as you pass through, is home to some of the greatest ghost writers of our time. And there's a couple of details that I really love in this room. For starters, this chair that is right below me actually is an adapted idea from a previous iteration of the concepts for the mansion. So, to explain, for those who have seen my videos on YouTube, I've previously discussed a concept called the Museum of the Weird. Effectively, the late Imagineer Raleigh Crump had this idea for an alternative to the mansion where, instead of being this ghost house, was instead a museum of these strange and supernatural artifacts, including a demonic chair with a face on it. And while the Museum of the Weird never happened tragically, we did still get the chair adapted. Obviously, its features were made more subtle, but still, to this day, what is commonly referred to as the Donald Duck chair is a prominent feature in the mansion. There, now just back to settle in my spot. The other thing in the library I want to talk about is these busts that you can see. You might notice they're angled kind of odd, and that's because they are part of an effect where they follow you as you ride past. And the way they do this is actually very simple, but I find it very clever in that it's not a statue at all. It's in fact an indent of the shape of a bust. That way, the perspective you're looking at it makes it look as if a bust is turning towards you. It's a very classic smoke and mirrors illusion that I think is done to fantastic effect. The other thing, being a haunted library, that you'll see in this scene sometimes is that the books themselves move around, be it floating off the shelves and such. And that's about it. It's a very brief scene that you pass during the early parts of the ride. The next room I want to show you is actually unique because it's only in certain versions of the mansion. If we're talking about the US versions, it's only in the Orlando mansion. And that is the endless staircases. You pass this similarly very early on the ride after you pass the library, and as is very self-explanatory, it's a number of very M.C. Escher-like endless staircases. And as you pass through, you see the physics and angles of these stairs take impossible proportions. And as you can see up here, you can see the ghostly footsteps of someone possibly lost endlessly on these stairs. Again, like I said, this is only in the Orlando version, and I think Tokyo's as well. And I find it to be such a unique scene that makes it feel very special to be visiting that version of the mansion. And it's also been adapted into interesting ways before, namely in Disney and Marvel's collaboration called the Disney Kingdoms comic series for their series about the Haunted Mansion. They basically introduced that these staircases connect the various mansions around the world to each other, and that in those comics, the Hatbox Ghost is the one who's skilled at navigating them and uses them to travel the world. And then finally for today, we have the endless hallway. Before we actually look down the hallway itself, I did want to touch on seeing not only our friend the Donald Duck chair again having followed us from the library, but also this suit of armor over to your right. And the interesting thing about this is that as you pass it, being a haunted house, of course, the suit of armor tends to jolt to life very briefly. However, once upon a time, they took it a little further, because it used to be, briefly, they had actual actors in the armor that would lunge out at guests on the ride. Now, this was discontinued for the one major issue that some guests either tried to, out of fear, escape their doom buggies or punch the person in the armor. So, safe to say that's no longer the thing, and we just have the minor animatronic moving the armor slightly as you pass. And I do think it's interesting in the upcoming movie later this month, we do know that the armor is going to feature, we've seen it in the trailers a number of times. But now to look down the actual hallway. Now, while relatively simple at first, this has become easily one of the most iconic views in the mansion. looking down a seemingly endless hallway of doors and chandeliers, and far in the distance, a single candelabra floats ominously in the air, drifting side to side, as if beckoning you down the hallway and wondering if you'll ever be seen again. Again, very simple, and the infinite hallway trick, I'm sure, has been explained a million times, but it's used to such effectiveness here, and the candelabra just adds this sense of unease to all of it. Because as many of you may have noticed by now, we've yet to actually see any ghosts. They've all been affecting the area around us, and we've seen them portrayed in different ways. But other than that, we've yet to see them physically manifest, and we'll get into why before long. Until then, stay tuned for next time on the Haunted Mansion Ghost Tour. Have a good night, all.